Welcome to The Writing Monkey, a podcast for writers about everything but writing. Subject matter experts and unique individuals are interviewed for writers by a writer.
Okay, I have with me today Adam Plantinga. He is a sergeant in the San Francisco Police Department. He has written a book called 400 Things Cops Know, Street Smart Lessons from a Veteran Patrolman. It's a book I think any writer needs to have, especially if you write anything to do with cops or policemen or crime scenes. But what I found really interesting about this book was it wasn't just a procedure manual. You actually have a BA in English. You are a writer. So a lot of what I got from this book was some really beautiful language, some really great language about being a policeman. So it's not just procedure. There's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of spice of life and flavor that I think really would help a writer with not just what does a policeman do on scene, but what is he thinking and feeling, which is a lot of what a writer needs to hear, which you don't get in normal interviews and normal sources of information.
I appreciate that.
I found your article in the Wall Street Journal, and that was really impressive. And I'm going to have a show page with links and notes and references on it.
Okay.
And in that article, it mentions that you had submitted to 90 agents and were rejected.
Yeah, I did.
So can you tell me about how you compiled your list and what process you used to go through all 90 agents and how long that might have taken you?
It took a while, and I was going for sort of, literary agents that put out crime nonfiction, and it's, I think especially lately, it's sort of tough sledding out there, especially for newer writers, and I hadn't really written much. I was pretty much an unknown, so I think that people were, and I get it, were sort of hesitant to take a chance on me, especially in this market. I did end up landing an agent, the 91st guy, and he did due diligence, but we couldn't quite make a deal happen. So then I just looked for smaller independent publishers, and I found one based out of Fresno, California, called Linden Publishing, and they had put out another book called 101 Road Patrol Tales, written by a former California highway patrolman.
You mentioned that you approached other crime writers and got them interested in the book, and I was wondering what effect that had.
Linden Publishing suggested I approach crime writers and see if they would be willing to take a look at the book and provide an endorsement if they thought it was any good. So I reached out to some folks whose work I really admired, folks like Joseph Wambaugh and George Pelicanos and Lee Child. And, these are folks that I imagine get a fair number of endorsement requests, and folks that are still writing and still pretty busy. So, they were very generous with their time, and I don't know, I may have just caught them on a good day, but I'll take it. When I got endorsements from them, I think it really helped. For instance, I think the only reason I was on the Wall Street Journal's radar is because Lee Child had talked about the book, and they figured, well, if Lee Child talks about it, then maybe we'll be interested in it too. So I owe Lee Child quite a bit. I should probably send him a holiday ham or something. He did me a real solid.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's incredible how one little favor can have such an effect. And I appreciate you doing this for me. I'm starting out with my podcast, and I reached out to you, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, you really resonated with me because you also wanted to be a writer and have written. And that makes your book, I know I'm repeating myself, but your book is so invaluable as a writer. And one reason I started this podcast is it's easy with the internet to get a lot of information on police procedure, but really it's a bit harder to get that flavor, the language, the pictures you paint with words in your book. And just being a writer and just reading through that, I've printed out so many examples. I'm a little overwhelmed with them because they just add so much to the flavor. One thing I wanted to do is also, I don't want to have a political discussion or talk about events of the day, but I do want to talk about correcting misperceptions people have of the police and correcting a lot of the trash that Hollywood puts out. And I know that writing pure nonfiction would be boring, but I would like fiction to be more accurate.
Sure.
I wanted to just start talking about your book, if that's okay. I feel like I might have cut you off. Did you have a thought about that, the inaccuracies in Hollywood and fiction and mainstream media?
Yeah, I watch probably as many cop shows as the next guy, and there are times when I will see something on the screen and, think to myself or actually say out loud, that's not how it would go. But I do think that, you got to give Hollywood a little room, a little leeway, because, while there's a fair amount of adrenaline in law enforcement, a lot of it is can be pretty dull. So if you take your typical detective, on any given day, he's running search warrants, he's making phone calls, he's looking at video surveillance, things that aren't really not really magnetic to the viewer. So, there's a lot of clerical work out there, and no one wants to see, CSI clerical. Nobody would watch that show.
That's
so
right.
I think it's okay to take some dramatic license, but I think you're right as to what you said earlier. If you can be accurate, if it doesn't take away from the story, then I think you should be, because otherwise it gets a little too sort of comic booky, I think.
Well,
If you want to write sort of a gritty police procedural, if you can sort of adhere to actual police policy and procedure, I think you come out with a more authentic product, and I think people will gravitate towards that more.
Yeah, it does get a bit ludicrous. But one thing you pointed out is that this is just randomly sampling your book. I mean, I read the whole book, but just randomly something pops into my head. You talk about how most crimes are not solved by some clever deduction or feat of Sherlock, high science or Sherlock Holmes deduction. It's usually that the perpetrator is stupid and they brag to their friends, or they leave fingerprints everywhere, things like that.
Yeah, I am astounded by the things that criminals do, and a lot of times, your typical street criminal is maybe committing crimes sort of spur of the moment. There's not a lot of planning there. They might be hopped up on, meth or crack, and so they'll commit a crime in front of a dozen witnesses, or right in front of a high-def video surveillance system, or they will. I've had criminals drop their IDs at scenes. They in effect sort of, these crimes sort of solve themselves.
It's amazing. I know one thing I've learned is this, as smart as I think I am, as much as I read and watch documentaries, the more I know about law enforcement, the more I know I could never get away with a crime. And I think it's funny that some of the worst perpetrators are actually people like doctors who are very smart, and they think they're so smart, they think they're smarter than the police. And I heard one cop say, you may be smarter than me, but you're not smarter than hundreds of years of detective work and thousands of people on the force working on this case. And the more you try to cover your crime, the more of a trail that you leave usually. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and I think that's right on. And science is just getting better. Especially DNA. It's getting the things that you can get DNA off of. The fact that crime labs are now more streamlined, so DNA test results come back a little quicker than they have in the past. And then just the prevalence of video. I mean, video is everywhere. So, these days, a lot of police departments, they'll get a photograph of a criminal off of a high-def video camera, and then they'll just put out an email blast to everyone in their department and everyone in neighboring departments. And some of these folks, commit crimes across jurisdictions. So, some cop in a neighboring department will say, "Hey, that's my crook from my jurisdiction," and they'll email to the officer that put the crime alert out. And we are catching a lot of people that way.
Yeah. Social media too. It goes
satisfying.
out to thousands of just random people in a jurisdiction. Social media will provide a lot of information too, I imagine.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. So I know the Golden State Killer was just recently caught using DNA. And I thought his case was interesting because that was a perfect overlap between when you could get away with stuff like that, because jurisdictions had just started communicating in the late 70s, early 80s. And now that things are computerized and more connected, I don't think you could get away with that very long now. Do you have thoughts on that, or thoughts on that case?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and it's amazing how long DNA can last. And, and as I understand it, the twist on this case was that they had sort of a partial DNA match that they submitted and were able to get, family relations that were a link, and they sort of worked that end of things to get to their suspects. So that's sort of a new twist on DNA investigations, and obviously brings up some privacy concerns. But in this case, boy, it really reaped dividends.
Yeah. So I wanted to get back to maybe with a lot of what your book focuses on is that real on the street, face to face stuff. Like, I mean, some of the stuff you read made me laugh. Some of it was heartbreaking. Some of the conditions that these children are in and these people live in. Some of the situations you think, my God, you're right. There's no fixing some of these people. Some of these homeless people. I was wondering if you had a story that, like, what would be your most heartbreaking story from the streets, your time in the streets?
Yeah, I think it just sort of generally speaking, one of the hardest parts of the job is dealing with kids. Just damaged kids that are growing up in households where a parent is on drugs and the other parent's locked up, and they're growing up in a neighborhood where the backdrop is gang violence and gunshots, and they might go to a school that is just barely making it, and the teachers don't really care about them. They just don't want them fighting. And their friends have guns. There's really no role models. How do you expect someone to come out of that living situation? You sort of marvel at anyone who does make it out of that, and some people have. But the deck is really stacked against those folks, and it's sort of, it's not fair. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see a lot of cops get involved in, like police athletic leagues or become mentors in Big Brother, Big Sister programs, because, you want to try to repair that in any way that you can, because that's hard to see. It's hard to see kids that aren't doing well.
Yeah, that's one thing I got from your book, which I appreciated, was the balance you seem to have between knowing when you had to really take forceful action against a criminal or a person who's difficult, and when you need to show compassion and give someone a break. And I think that's a big part of what I would find. I think, well, I'm not close to being a cop, but I would find that hard to determine that, to make those choices, when to let someone go, when to be too, I think I would let emotions get in the way personally too much. I think that's one thing I was hoping to do too, is get across to, my audience. I have to keep reminding myself is writers, and writers may have experience in one area, but not in a lot of others. And most people don't have experience as a policeman or law enforcement agent. And one thing I've known from my academic research is how hard the lifestyle is. And that's one thing I wanted to get across to more writers who would want to write a character who may be a policeman or interacting with a policeman, is how hard the job can be. So that's why I'm asking those questions. Sometimes the show will allude to or touch on the fact that most of the job is tedium, and the show is only highlighting the parts where action takes place, where some shows seems like they're always in action mode,
Right.
And I was going to ask you if you have a show that you like, that you think is more accurate than others.
I thought that the HBO show The Wire was it's probably the best cops I've ever seen, maybe the best show I've ever seen. It just sort of got it, in terms of how the inner city works and sort of police culture and attitudes, some of the futility of the drug war. That was a show that had a fair amount of action, but it wasn't a show where cops are running around with their guns out, kicking down doors. It was, there was a lot of sort of a pretty substantial cerebral aspect to it. So I would tell anyone that wants to at least get a sense of inner city police work to watch that show. It's mesmerizing.
That's really cool. Have you watched The Shield?
I watched a little bit of The Shield, but it wasn't quite my cup of tea.
Yeah, they were nothing but corrupt cops, and they got worse and worse. They dug the hole deeper and deeper. So.
Yeah, and and that obviously, if you read the papers, you know that kind of thing happens. But
yeah, it's not the kind of one.
Boy, is it rare.
Yeah.
Most of the folks that I work with, they're honorable people, and they do the job for the right reasons.
Right. So what show do you hate, or have you watched that you thought was just a joke? It was ludicrous. It was so poorly done, or just unbelievable.
I think probably just any show where, the male cops are sort of rugged and frequently shirtless, and the women have really gleaming, bouncy hair and dress really well, and they just look like sort of Hollywood people, and they solve the crime in 20 minutes and get a full written confession, and it's just sort of that sort of Hollywood sheen on shows. I tend to like things that are a little grittier, like The Wire, maybe like Hill Street Blues.
Oh yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with the shows I'm talking about. It's sort of escapist. If you like that kind of thing, go for it. But
yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about was what happens when you find a dead body? Because I know in the movies and TV, they go in there and they start kicking it around and solving the crime in 10 minutes. And I read one book about a murder in Las Vegas where they found a body, and it was fascinating, even though it laid out a 14-hour period where they found the body from the people who showed up and came and left, and it took them 14 hours before they even touched the body. And I was wondering if you have any experience with finding a dead body and having gone through that process.
Yeah, well, and a lot of it depends on, what the circumstances are. If it looks like there's any sort of foul play, that's a completely different animal.
Right.
If it's just appears to be just a natural death with nothing hinky, then there's sort of a procedure you follow. But if it looks at all like there might be any kind of criminality associated with it, no, you don't touch the body. And you may cover it up. You want to sort of preserve evidence. The person that goes hands-on with the body will be the medical examiner, because you don't want to disturb anything in terms of trace evidence, hairs, fibers. You don't want to accidentally step in, a pool of blood, or there have been situations where cops have approached the body and accidentally kicked the murder weapon away just because they stumble over it at night.
Yeah.
So everything kind of slows down. There's no rush. There are certain circumstances where, if you have a body down and it's in, say, a housing project that is not sort of police friendly, sometimes you have sort of near riot situations where you have people coming out, and it may be someone that they know, and they're sort of crowding around you, and it creates a situation that's not safe. Then you may actually move the body from the scene to the hospital, even if there's sort of very little medical chance of reviving this person, just because you have to preserve the crime scene, and the body is the crime scene, at least part of it. So I've seen that happen many times too.
Yeah, and you've talked about death. There's a whole, a chapter 12, 14 things cops know about being among the dead. There was some interesting stuff in that. And would you talk about the death scene, the colors in front of you, help you figure out a rough time frame for when this person expired? I'd like to hear more about that, and I'd like the audience to hear it, because I think it's very interesting how you can look, when you're trained, how you can look at a scene and gather this information.
Yeah, well, a lot of it is, and one of the things that you learn pretty quickly as an officer is, if you come upon a body and it has sort of a greenish tint to it, you think to yourself, well, that's the same color that that hamburger might turn when it's been left out too long. But that's what the human body is. It's meat.
Yeah.
So a medical examiner can definitely determine time of death within a pretty narrow time frame. But if a lot of the things that you're looking for at a death scene, you always have sort of your Sherlock Holmes hat on. You're trying to see, even if this death looks natural, if there's anything unusual about the scene. It looked like there was a struggle. Is the blood that there's blood around? Is that sort of a spatter pattern that's consistent with death, or more consistent with a crime? I mean, sometimes, for instance, you'll find someone at the bottom of a stairwell. Well, did that person fall, or were they pushed? A lot of that is CSI examining blood spatter patterns, talking to witnesses to see if their story lines up, see if the chronology lines up. You always have to sort of think dirty. But you don't come across a lot of sort of the Miss Marple whodunits. Most crime scenes are sort of as they appear to be, but enough of them occur where it's sort of staged to look like a natural death when it's not. That you always have to ask sort of those questions, because that's your job. That's doing due diligence.
Right. So police officers aren't crime scene. They're not CSI, but are you trained to some degree so you can determine how much you should cordon off a scene or what actions you should take when you come across a body like that?
Yeah, a lot of it's sort of pretty standard stuff they teach in the police academy. And if you're going to err one side or the other, you want to make the crime scene too big, because you can always bring it in. But if you make it too small, it can be hard to sort of expand it.
Right.
And then you'll have sort of an inner perimeter, an outer perimeter. If you have a homicide scene, your inner perimeter will be set, and the only people you want in the inner perimeter are the detectives actually investigating the case, the medical examiner, and CSI.
Right.
You don't want sort of your typical street cop walking around there, because again, they could be stepping at evidence, they could be kicking evidence down the street, and that's another one of the lessons you learn as a new cop is, you think, well, I'm a cop, I should be right in the thick of things, but sometimes the very best thing you can do is to step away, just make sure you're sort of clear, not contaminating the scene,
Right.
because there's always you hear stories about you're a cop and you're drinking a bottle of cola, and you accidentally leave it at the crime scene. So you go back to get it, and some evidence tech is putting in a plastic bag as evidence. So then the resulting conversation is super awkward. Hey, that's mine. The killer didn't leave that. You don't want to try to avoid those kind of situations.
Yeah, I can imagine. So yeah, I know. I watch a lot of these shows too, and from what I understand, some of the crime scenes, it takes them a lot more work to eliminate fingerprints and footprints and all kind of evidence from the policemen or the people who have walked all over the crime scene who shouldn't have even been there. But,
Right.
So yeah, I don't want to dwell on the morbid too much. I wanted to actually switch gears a little bit and ask you about dealing with hookers on the street, because people write a lot about that, and they tend to write the cliches. They're usually Julia Roberts, in Pretty Woman, which is not your typical hooker. And I'm going to interview some former prostitutes on this show, and their version of reality lines up with yours almost word for word. If you don't mind explaining what dealing with a typical prostitute is really like on the street.
Yeah, I did a short stint with Vice Control, working with prostitution stings, and I mean, there's sort of a couple different kinds of folks that are involved in prostitution. You have sort of your high-end people that maybe you hire through websites, but in terms of your typical street hooker, the vast majority of those folks are drug addicts. They're not nymphomaniacs. They're not out there because they really like sex. They're out there because they're trying to make money to get the next fix. So, you're talking about people that a lot of them are homeless or close to it. A lot of them have sores or scabs on their face. They smell bad. They twitch, which, and as a cop, you look at these ladies and think, who is going to want to engage in a money for sex transaction with them? But people do, and that's why they're out there.
That's what's always confounded me.
Yeah, it's amazing, but it's a lot of people consider it sort of a quality of life crime or a victimless crime, and I know you can make that argument, but when you have prostitutes in any given area, it brings with it a fair amount of street crime. A lot of these prostitutes sometimes set up their johns for robberies. And if you're paying a fair amount of money for your home and property taxes, do you really want to look out your window and see women of the night, turning tricks in front of your house? I don't.
Yeah, one of the lines in your book is prostitutes are a destabilizing element in any neighborhood, and I thought that was a good line. And you point out cycle how that happens, how having a prostitute on the street corner has a ripple effect on almost every aspect of that neighborhood if they're allowed to stay there.
Well, and it's a two-way street. I mean, I have some sympathy for the prostitutes that are in this situation, because a lot of it's addiction, and they get massive crack gets their hooks into them, and this isn't the life that they imagine they'd have. The folks that really get ticked off with are the Johns that sort of make this whole thing sustainable. When you arrest a prostitute, you treat them with respect. Always try to pass on information about drug addiction programs or sort of transitional living places, because you're not rooting against them. You want them to get off the street. And a lot of times prostitutes can be great sources of information. They can tell you who they think might have committed, the armed robbery down the street or the assault, in your patrol sector. So a lot of them can really help you out if you, treat them with respect and listen to them.
So I know some guys who have, I can't even wrap my head around the naivete that some of these guys have, that they think they're going to rescue this woman, that this woman loves them, and they're just being totally played. And I was wondering, have you had any experience, seen anybody in your dealings with prostitution being manipulated like that or strung along?
Yeah, I worked in investigations for a time, and I had a lot of cases come across my desk where, some guys, he's horny on a Friday night, so he tries to pick up a girl, and she lures him either into an apartment or down this alley or that alley, and suddenly he sees a gun in his face, and not only does he not get to get with this lady, but now he's missing his wallet and maybe his wedding ring, and now he's got to figure out what he's going to tell his wife. Yeah. So people put themselves in really bad situations, and those are just the ones I hear about. I'm sure there's a lot of unreported robberies because this John's thinking, well, I can't tell the police this because I'm engaged in unlawful conduct. So, I probably don't even know the half of it.
I wanted to talk about, use of force is a big deal. I guess I'd like to talk about use of force because I don't think a lot of people understand why it looks so bad and how it can't look any better than it does when you're dealing with the people you deal with. I don't think people really understand a few miles away what life is like for some of these people and how they think and how desperate they are, how ignorant they are. I'm going to ask you to break down the stages of the use of force. You talk about 4 categories of use of force.
In the academy, they teach you these various techniques and tactics, and these are subject matter experts that come up with this stuff, and it's good stuff. It works. So various takedowns or sort of arm bars or punches or strikes. But what you quickly learn as a street cop is that a lot of times things move so fast that you may not have time to sort of do sort of the trained technique. So, you get a lot of sort of free-for-alls in the street where, suspects and even cops are sort of reverting to their old sort of 4th grade playground fights where, it can even deteriorate into sort of pushing and sometimes even hair pulling. It gets pretty ridiculous. But, it's not ballet out there. It gets pretty ugly. And one of the things that amazed me when I became a street cop and started getting into scuffles with people is you could have some, 5'0", 90-pound suspect hopped up on crack who has a burning desire to avoid arrest. It can take 4, sometimes even 5 pretty athletic, pretty strong cops to take that person into custody. Everyone sort of grabs a leg. If someone really wants to get away, they really make you work for it. And I think you had alluded to this earlier. I think sometimes the public, what they don't understand is they might see 6 cops on one suspect and think, well, this guy's getting brutalized. The suspect's getting brutalized. There's 6 cops around him. But if you're a cop or a suspect, that's what you want, because the more cops, the better. Because like I said, everyone can take a limb. One cop can grab an arm, one cop can grab a leg, and you can actually limit the damage that the suspect can do, and that's the damage that you're doing to him. What you want to avoid is sort of one cop versus one suspect, some sort of long, drawn-out brawl, because both people are going to get hurt.
Or where the cop is almost forced to have to shoot the suspect because there's no way to subdue him, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, the more cops, the less chance that someone's going to have to use deadly force, because you can just, what you want to do is just overwhelm a suspect.
Right.
With just overwhelming force, because then you can take them into custody quickly, and once the handcuffs are on, you're in pretty good shape. The more cops you have, the easier it is to handcuff somebody.
Yeah, I know the media will show less than 1% of an event and not the whole story, and there's so much leading up to it. I would say in almost all cases, there's so much that we don't see, like what the suspect actually looked like the day of the arrest, not 5 years earlier in 8th grade,
Right.
Things like that.
And, I think that it's not really realistic for the police to expect, the public to be sort of experts in use of force. That's why I think, probably need to do a better job of explaining ourselves to people. And I've tried to do that from time to time,
Yeah.
I've been in fights with people that to a observer would maybe look pretty bad. And, once the cuffs are on and the suspect's either going to the hospital or going to jail, if there's still onlookers around who seem sort of upset, I'll just take the time to say, look, this is what we did and this is why we did it. I knew this guy was a violent parolee with a warrant. I know he's carried a gun in the past. So I'm not going to take any chances. We're going to go hands-on and try to control the guy as quickly as possible.
Wow, I think that goes a long way when you do something like that. I think a lot of people respond to that positively.
I do too. I think one of the traditional sort of police weaknesses is when you have bystanders who say, what's going on, I think cops wrongly will often say, shut up or mind your own business.
Yeah. Do you want to get arrested too, is what they often say.
Right. That's not where you want to be. You don't get anywhere unless you have public and community support. And I think it's sort of on the cops to say, look, this is what we did and this is why we did it. I think that does go a long way.
Yeah. Once again, I want to refer my listeners to your book, 400 Things Cops Know, because you do a beautiful job of painting a picture of what it's like to have some of these street brawls with a suspect and how vicious and chaotic it can get. And how nasty it is. You're not fighting a stuntman or another guy who's showered in the last 24 hours. You're fighting some really dirty, desperate individuals. I've had very small tastes of that in my life, nothing close to what you've done, and it's not pleasant. And I always encourage my listeners or people who come to me for writing advice is you have to get out there and try to do some of those things. If you can get a ride along, if you can get someone to let you fire a gun or experience anything, go talk to one thing I did for my children was I had them talk to homeless people when they were little, because they were watching the TV tends to glamorize, romanticize things, and I'm like, I want you to go talk to a real homeless person so you can see and smell how they live, which is really different than what you see on TV. It's not this antiseptic funny hobo on TV.
That's a good point. And there's a lot of departments that also offer citizen police academies. And I think there's at least one Writers Police Academy or something like it out there. And like you said, that's invaluable to sort of get hands-on experience.
I say this in every episode. I'm just one of these people. If I start writing about something, I really want to know about it. I have to go talk to cops or doctors or prostitutes or whoever I'm writing about, because I really want to know what their life is like. I don't want to just write a cliche or make up something that's not accurate, or worse, ignore that person. Just ignore a whole category of society by not writing about them because I'm too uncomfortable to ask about it, And, you just have so many great lines in this book. One of them is right in the beginning: most bad guys can't shoot for spit. They're about as accurate as the stormtroopers in Star Wars. And you go on to talk about how some gangbangers actually join the military for weapons training. Have you come across that? Do you have an opinion about how that might be handled differently by the military? Is there any way they can screen for that?
I'm under the impression, and this is just an impression, I don't know actually base it is, but that the military has had some recruiting troubles of late, so that there may have been certain hiring standards have been relaxed. Maybe someone who had, been convicted of this crime or that crime in the past may not have been eligible for the military, but now they are. The military is one of the noblest professions out there, but you do have folks who join the Marine Corps, get weapons training, and then come back to their neighborhood and use that to commit crimes. And I'm not really sure what to do about that, but those are some of the, I know someone who knows how to, for instance, use a rifle. That's one of the most dangerous folks out there, because as a typical street cop, your ballistic vest doesn't offer any more protection against a rifle than if you had, a plastic bag lashed to your chest. So that's where you want to try to get cover behind an engine block and call for SWAT who has their own rifles. That's a bad scene.
That's right. I know one guy I'm trying to get to interview is a guy who joined the military as a gang member and ended up loving it and staying in it, and it changed his life for the better. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The military can change people's lives for the better. I know that for sure. And you do have gang members that change things around and become gang counselors. And, gang members will listen to them because they've been there and they have that street cred.
Do you mind sharing with me, have you ever had to draw your weapon? I know that's a rarity, actually, among policemen. They don't draw their weapons a lot.
I think that it may depend on where you work. If you work a pretty high crime sector, it's certainly unusual to have to fire a weapon. I think nationwide, maybe 95, 96% of cops go their entire career without having to fire the weapon other than at the range. But in terms of drawing it, that is not so rare. If you're an active street cop working in an active high crime area, you may be drawing your weapon sometimes once a day or maybe once a week. It all depends.
Okay.
It's sort of one of those things. It's better to have your gun out in your hand and not need it than to need it and not have it. So, that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah, I'm not even going to ask you if you shot anybody. That's too personal. It's just tasteless. But I am interested in, like, maybe the most frightened you've ever been before, during, or after an incident.
Well, I responded to this past summer. We had an incident at the UPS warehouse in San Francisco. Oh
yeah, I remember that.
Where a man who was an employee ended up shooting and killing 3 of his coworkers and shooting 2 more. And I was on the response team that went in and to address that, and that was a bad scene. We were sent to try to find a suspect who was dressed in a UPS uniform, and when you get there, everyone's in a UPS uniform.
Yeah.
I remember the fire alarm was going off because when the shooting had started, someone had pulled it, and it was dark in the warehouse. We didn't know where the shooter was, and we were able to make contact with the shooter and challenge him, and he chose to take his own life. But that was pretty intense. That was it almost felt like a police simulation, sort of cranked up to level 15. And you sort of rely on your training and your fellow officers, but some of these things are sort of no best practices for. You just try to do the best you can, and sometimes it works out, sometimes you get lucky. But that was, I'd say that was one of the few times in my police career where I was fighting the sense that I was being overwhelmed by a scene, because there are so many things in play. There's so much stimulus.
Yeah.
That was intense.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that with me. And I remember seeing that in the news. And so let's switch gears and tell me about the funniest thing that you have had happen on the job.
One of the funny parts about the job is that you can, you're a generalist, and you go from one assignment that's pretty intense to another assignment that's pretty goofy. So I remember responding to a shooting scene that was pretty bloody and pretty grim. And then when we packed up and finished up that scene, the very next scene, or the very next assignment we were sent to, my partner and I, was someone was reporting a loose possum in their back stairwell. So you go from this sort of gangland shooting to sort of possum patrol, and my partner and I, we were checking the stairwell for sort of this older person, and it's really sort of a job for animal control, but we wanted to try to help out. So we're just kind of poking around with nets looking for this possum, and we'd see it and it sort of stick its head out and kind of hiss at us. And, we were there for probably 45 minutes, and I thought, oh, this is just ridiculous. I mean, just sort of the contrast between the shooting scene and how trying to catch this wayward possum made me realize that, you really have to shift gears pretty quickly in this job.
So did you pull your gun on the possum?
I did not. I thought, I can probably handle this little guy without a firearm. But he was pretty crafty.
So how did it end? Did y'all get it in a bag or kick it out of the stairwell or what?
Had some sort of makeshift net that we got it in, but it took us a long time. It drew on all of our police skills and training. So
I think we're coming to the end here, and I appreciate all your time. I might have fumbled through this a little bit. I think I was a bit overwhelmed because your book just excited me. It's almost like going to a buffet. There's just the way you've written it. There's just so many bits and pieces that almost every sentence is an inspiration. It's either funny or it's interesting or it's terrifying or sad. It's a great piece of writing.
Well, thank you.
And you have another book coming out, right?
I do. It is slated to come out December of this year. It's a sort of sequel to the first one. It's a nonfiction police book, but for this one, it's more sort of short essay as opposed to some of the kind of bullet point passages in the first book. Plus, I spent a little more time on investigations, interrogation, evidence, and I sat down with a couple of subject matter experts, and for instance, the K9 unit and the bomb squad and the SWAT team, just to sort of glean from them what they think about the job is interesting, what be interesting sort of the layman. And, it's amazing. You think, as a cop, you have some years in and, that you know some things, but it's amazing what you don't know. And, I learned quite a bit from talking to these folks. And so I was happy to put it in a book because I was hoping that other cops could learn from that as well as writers and just people that are interested in police work.
That's really great. I'm going to, I'll definitely have you back on if you're willing.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll definitely let my listeners know about your book when it comes out to keep me updated. And I'll definitely buy a copy. And I live close enough to you. I'm down in Monterey, so
nice.
Maybe I'll get a signed copy one day.
That's a nice, that's a beautiful area.
Yeah, it's really nice. Adam Plantinga, is that right?
You got it. You're saying it better than I do.
No. All right, man. Well, thanks for your time. I'm going to hang up on you now. I really appreciate your time, man. I'll be emailing you soon.
Thank you, Luke. Thanks for having me on, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for listening to the Writing Monkey podcast. Be sure to visit us online to access our comprehensive show notes and bonus content. Until next time, write, you monkey.